emphasis with the original.
Hi.
Hey there.
How are you guys?
Hey, Krista.
Hey, Krista.
I wonder where Krista's going.
Are you driving? No, Krista.
Yeah, I'm driving. I'm coming back to Colorado from Moab.
From where?
From Moab. I don't know if you can see, but
That's what it looked like from the, I thought you were coming back from Moab. Sweet. What are you doing in Moab?
I've been here for a month, highlighting and just enjoying canyoneering, hiking, biking with my dog.
And you were totally okay being there? Like they didn't make a fuss about it?
This week, that I was on call status, and technically I was. It's just they didn't end up opening up their dining room, so I never got to work. But I was here and available to do so if asked to, and I have enough friends and community here that it wasn't a big deal for me at all.
Where do you work?
I work at a bakery called Sweet Cravings. I'm pretty much a line cook. It's not the right job, but it's the right people. So I took it on a couple of years ago for spring and fall, and I pretty much love it. It works really well. I work 3 or 4 tens a week, and I have plenty of time off to play.
That sounds awesome. Cats are so cool. I wish I wasn't allergic to them.
There's some cats that don't have hair.
What have you been up to, Lynn?
Working out a lot, helping Stacy move.
Oh, she moving? Where's she moving?
It's like 5 minutes from where she lives.
Oh, okay.
And then, oh yeah, someone hired me to make a logo for them, so I've been working on that.
What kind of company or person?
Landscaping. Hey, Cody.
What's up?
But not much. What have you guys been up to?
I've been voting a lot. That's pretty much that. Otherwise, been working for the rafting company a little bit, and yeah, been growing food and stuff.
Everyone's quiet today.
I just came back from actual work today, so.
Oh yeah, speaking of, did anybody do Murph today? Krista? No listening. Dana, did you do it today?
I didn't do Murph. Our gym isn't doing Murph. We're gonna like postpone it until we can have more people, because there's normally like a barbecue afterwards, and he didn't want to do it with like 12 people.
So you're open.
We've been open, and Eagle County just moved from 10 people in a gathering to 50 people in a gathering. So the gym can have more people, but not, I don't know, he didn't want to do like 50.
We only had 10 today. And we had two options. We could do like a version of Murph, or we could do the regular strength workout. I did the strength workout, and I'm gonna do Murph on Tuesday or Thursday this week, I think. Hi, everyone who came in that I didn't say hi to.
Did anybody do anything cool this past week? Nah.
I canyoneered for the first time with my dog, and we top-laid him up into the canyon, and then we rappelled him down hanging off my harness. It was pretty rad.
Wow, that is pretty cool. That's a cool thing.
Really cool.
How did your dog handle it? Pretty okay?
He did fine as long as he was free hanging. If he could get his toes like onto the ground, he was a little stressed out and squirming. If you want to, I think there's still a video on my Instagram story.
I want to see.
I'm doing a talk tomorrow night at 6 o'clock on tips on being a beginner, and it's being broadcast out to Slackline US, and so those details are on my Instagram too. Sorry to shamelessly plug another talk, but
Self-promote, do it.
I don't see your dog in a video, Krista. I see your dog in pictures.
Yeah, there should be pictures on my story. I'll send them out. Actually, I'll just put them back on my Instagram if you want to check my Instagram this afternoon.
Okay.
This evening.
I think the only people that I don't know in here are Kelly Nugent, sorry, and Tara Adams. If you guys want to say hello.
Tara Adams.
Hi.
Awesome.
I'm Kat.
East Coast right now.
That's cool. Both of you go at once, you know.
East Coast.
Yeah.
Cool. Sweet. Where are you out of, Tara?
Mount Snow.
Mount Snow. Also is cool. Cool. Beautiful. Well, I'm Conrad. I'm out of Aspen, Snowmass area, buttermilk based. And
Nice.
And then Brandon. Hey, how you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Where are you out of, Brandon?
I'm in Colorado with Lynn, Beaver Creek.
Oh, cool. Sweetness. All right, guys. Well, it's 5 past, so we're gonna get started here. So, if anybody I don't know, I'm Conrad. And I think
All right.
I think everybody else, those new 3, and I know everybody else. So, thanks for joining us for the last one. That's actually just Rocky Mountain, and after this, we'll transition into being mingled with Northern Rocky Mountain, which will be cool too. So today I've got 2 presenters. We've got Dana right over here, lovely Dana, presenting on polyvagal theory, and she's going to be up first. So for you guys who haven't been in here before, the format is just, we've got like 45 minutes to an hour for one presenter to present, and then we'll open it up to discussion kind of throughout or at the end, depending on how the presenter wants to do that. And then we've got Damion Lee, who's going to be presenting the second half of this as well. So without further ado, if you would all just mute yourselves, unless Daniel doesn't want you to mute yourselves, and then and then we'll cruise into the first part. So Thanks very much.
All right, thanks guys for being here, especially on Memorial Day. So my name is Dana. I teach out of Buttermilk. I teach skiing and snowboarding. And I will be talking about the polyvagal theory today, kind of giving like a polyvagal 101 for those of you who might have never heard of the theory. Is there anyone here by a show of hands who has heard of the polyvagal theory? Cool. I don't see a single hand. That's actually pretty awesome. So I originally got into it because I'm very interested in psychology and therapy and kind of what makes people tick and how to better be of service, especially with my students. So we're going to do a little screen share, and I'll have Conrad, can you put up the first one? So the polyvagal theory, I need to backtrack a second. And
We'll just need Lynn to.
Yeah, Lynn, we need screen sharing.
Let me do that.
So I'm going to put up a diagram of the vagus nerve, and that will help us introduce the polyvagal theory because it is based upon this one cranial nerve. We have 12 cranial nerves that stem from the brain. This one, I think personally, is the coolest. And if you guys look at the screen right now, you can see the vagus nerve. In Latin, vagus means wandering. And if you look at this nerve, you actually see that it does wander from the spine all the way down through our vital organs. And it is important that we have a little backstory on this nerve so that we can understand a little bit more of the theory. Conrad, you can take that screen off. Okay, so the polyvagal theory, poly meaning many, and vagal relating to the vagus nerve, was introduced in 1994 by Dr. Stephen Porges. He is a psychologist, and he came up with this. And it's a theory that believes that the vagus nerve, which I just showed you guys, is interconnected with and sensitive to influences that flow from the body to the brain, which normally when we think about our body and brain, we think about the brain giving information to our body, but actually this nerve gives about 80% of information from our body to our brain. Another little piece of backstory that we need to know before we go deep diving into this theory is the autonomic nervous system. So it controls our breathing, our heart rate, and our digestion, and it's completely out of our control. It just happens. The two branches are sympathetic and parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is generally where we want to be. That's generally where we're the happiest, our heart rate is the slowest, and sympathetic, we'll go a lot more in depth in this, but this is like danger mode when our heart rate is elevated. The theory itself came about to deal with people who have dealt with trauma. And maybe our students haven't dealt with trauma, but maybe they have. So this is just kind of a backing to better help our students, especially those who might have things going on that aren't exactly clear to us. I know I have had a lot of students in the past 11 years that I've been teaching who have I'm just not sure what's going on with them. Like they're not giving me a lot of feedback. There's something off about them and I don't know what's going on, but that's not the important part. The important part is how can we help those students who are either just exhibiting symptoms that are not normal of someone who is safe and social. Okay, so the polyvagal theory is based around 3 states that we can enter. And I'm gonna do another screen share and show you guys what those 3 states are. They are safe and social, flight and fight, and shutdown or freeze. And I'm sure, let's get a show of hands. Has anyone heard of those terms? Safe and social, fight and flight, freeze? Okay, cool. So here's a little chart just showing the 3 different stages. The only thing I don't like about this chart here is I feel like it should be the other way around. Like social, safe and social should be the top, like that's where we want to be. But this is the chart that I found online. A couple things about these states. They happen unconsciously. We do not choose them. This is really important to understand. Our bodies have evolved over millions of years to fall into these states if there's danger or if we're feeling safe or if our life is threatened. We, once again, do not choose to go into these. They simply happen. So the thing about these states is that they are very normal. We can get out of this card if you want. They're totally normal and they're supposed to happen. If there's a threat of danger, like, I don't know, something's chasing us, like a mountain lion, we're supposed to go into flight and run. That's totally normal. The not so normal thing is if we get stuck in these states, and that can happen, especially with people that have undergone trauma. People can get stuck in flight. They can get stuck in fight. They can get stuck in freeze, and then they can start living their life through this lens. Like their day-to-day is experienced through the lens of fight. I think a good example would be like a youth gang member, and maybe there aren't gang members where you are living right now, but I grew up in a very urban environment where there were a lot of youth gang members, and those kids get stuck in this fight mode constantly. They live in fight mode. They're always alert. They're always scanning around for danger, and they're perceiving everything as a threat. They can come up into safe and social, but it's rare. And we might interact with students who have undergone trauma, and trauma can mean anything. It can be anything that happens too fast, too much, too soon, and your body can't process it. So it's not really about like what happened to the student. We don't need to know that part. It's just the fact that they might come to us and they might be stuck in one of these states. They might not be in safe and social. Not everyone that we interact with is going to be in safe and social. We want them to be there. We want ourselves to be there so that we can be the best teachers we can be in. But the reality is it doesn't always happen. And something as simple as being scared to even try skiing or snowboarding, that can trigger someone into a flight state. And they might be in that flight state the whole lesson. And that just might be because they're scared to be there, but because they've undergone trauma in the past, they can't regulate their nervous system. So they're just stuck there like the whole day. As we move farther down the ladder, we lose access to behaviors that are associated with safe and social. And I'll talk a lot more about that. The way that our body goes into different states is a thing called neuroception. And this is a word from Dr. Stephen Porges, who came up with the polyvagal theory. And that is the body's ability to detect risk outside of our conscious awareness. So it brings info through our senses, detecting risk outside and inside of itself. And that is the really important part, is the inside of itself. Because although we might seem totally safe at the base of the mountain, right? There's tons of space, the sun is shining. We as instructors are like, everything's safe, we're good, we're setting our students up for success. In their mind, they might be neurocepting danger. They might be thinking, someone's gonna come out of nowhere and hit me, or I'm just gonna fall and break all my bones, or an avalanche might happen. And I know that might sound silly to us, but I've had students that are genuinely afraid of the prospect of an avalanche just happening, like on the bunny slope, because they don't know. So there's healthy neuroception, where the body detects and shifts to the appropriate state based on the environment. So based on reality, like if there's an actual risk, that person, if they need to run, they're going to go into flight. But then once that danger's over, they're out of flight. So that's healthy neuroception. You can think of like a game of tag, for instance. Play is a great example of healthy neuroception. In a game of tag, we have someone who's chasing, someone who's running, so that person's in flight mode. If it's like hide and go seek tag, the person who's hiding is in freeze mode, right? They have to freeze, they have to go into shutdown. But then when the game's over, they can go back up into safe and social. So play is a really good way to exercise those states. Unhealthy neuroception is when the body is just perceiving everything as dangerous, so they're constantly stuck in those states. And people, like I said, live their lives through that lens, especially trauma survivors. They can just be stuck in one of those modes all the time, or most of the time. Everyone has a different window of tolerance, so maybe one of your students can tolerate different things. Like they can tolerate the stress of starting snowboarding for the first time, and they can healthfully regulate their nervous system. But then maybe another student, like gliding, like skating, is really scary for them. So everyone's window of tolerance is very different. We are gonna go really in depth now into those 3 states. So I'm gonna start with the safe and the social. And that was believed to have evolved 200 million years ago. And this is actually the newest state. So there was freeze first, flight and fight, and then safe and social. We're gonna talk about that first. So in safe and social, this is what it looks like. And why it evolved is so that we can be part of a tribe. We can be part of a herd. And it's not just humans, it's all mammals. So think of like dogs, they're part of a pack, right? That's why this evolved, so that we can have that tribal mentality and that safety that comes along with being part of a group. So what this looks like is we naturally engage with other people when we're in safe and social. And this is how we can recognize if our student is there. They use eye contact. Eye contact can only happen fully if someone is in safe and social. They're in closer proximity, like Conrad and I right now. I feel safe around Conrad. Hopefully he feels safe around me, and we're sitting close to one another. So we're in safe and social together. And then a full range of facial expressions. If we're in safe and social, we can use that whole range of our face. If not, we're not going to be using like things like smiling or just like any sort of crinkling of the eyes. That's not going to happen. And then the last thing is vocal prosody. So if someone isn't safe and social, they're using their full range of voice. And I realize that not everyone talks like this all the time, and that's okay, but it's just another cue that you can look for. It's kind of like more of like a sing-songy voice. Doesn't have to be fake, but when people are in safe and social, they're using that full range. So those are things that you guys can look for to know if your student is safe and social, like eye contact, closeness, smiling. Those are things that you can look for. The body is able to restore itself. It's able to be healthy, most healthy when it's in safe and social. We want to be in this state. And so moving on, we've got flight and fight. And flight and fight, although they share a lot of similarities, they are different, but they are often lumped together because they both activate the sympathetic nervous system. So I will share with you guys why this evolved. So flight evolved so that we could run from danger, and fight evolved so that we could fight off danger, a predator, whatever was there. What happens when we are in flight or fight is that the heart rate goes up, the blood pressure goes up, and all of our blood rushes out to our limbs. It rushes out to our legs so that we could run, and it rushes out to our arms so that we can fight. Fight and flight is good. Like I said, yeah, Corey, thank you. It's totally natural. Flight and fight is awesome when it's appropriate. And it's meant to be acute. The problem happens when it starts to be chronic, when someone starts to live in flight or fight. And I'm sure you guys, hopefully you haven't, but maybe you have, had those students who are just stuck in fight mode. They're constantly irritated. They're aggravated. Everything's a problem. They had a problem getting to the mountain that morning. Their coffee order was wrong. The boots don't fit. This and this and this and this and that. They're just really negative, and they're just stuck in that fight mode. And you're like, oh my gosh, why can't I get this person out of here? Other things to look for if someone is in flight or fight is a flat affect. Don't confuse this with a neutral face, although it can be, but a flat affect is just not used. You cannot smile when you're in flight or fight. It's impossible. And breathing is usually in the chest, and that's because the chest muscles and the throat muscles become really constricted. So you can see someone like, if you see their shoulders rising, they're probably in fight or flight. And they're usually talking in really short little bursts, and their breathing just sounds shallow. And especially if they're in fight, their voice starts to become a lot louder. So those are things that you can look for. Another something I find really interesting about the flight or fight is that our middle ear muscles turn off. So we can't hear human voice as effectively as we can. However, what we can hear if we're in flight or fight are really low noises or really high noises. Have you guys ever had a student, maybe a child, who you're talking to and they're not responding and they just look like they're not paying attention? I've had those students, and you're just like, hello, hello, and they're just like this. They could be in flight or fight mode. We don't know. If they're in that mode, they actually either can't hear your voice or they can hear your voice, but they can't process it. And it is not their fault, and they are not being rude. They actually just cannot hear you. They are in fight or flight mode, and their middle ear muscles are turned off. The reason why they can hear low noises is because evolutionarily, if we were out in the wild and there was danger, we need to hear low noises, such as growling, avalanches, earthquakes, or really, really high noises like screaming. And that might be your mammalian friend who is being attacked, in which case you are either going to go to help them and fight, or you're going to run away so you also don't get attacked. So that's the evolution behind that. And I've been in classes so many times, especially in public school. I substitute teach, where I've just been talking at the whole class and there are students just off in space, and I call their name and I call their name and nothing. And I'm just like, they're just being so rude, and they're not. They could have something going on at home, who knows what, but they're probably in that fight or flight mode. Okay. Also, people that are in that mode generally don't make good behavioral choices. So if you have a child in your class, and I'm going to speak mostly about children, but this also applies to adults, they're not making good behavioral choices if they're in fight or flight mode. Neutral faces could look really scary, especially for teenagers. So if a teen is in flight or fight, have you guys ever heard of kids that say, well, he looked at me the wrong way, so I had to fight him? He looked at me wrong, you know? I've heard that before. And that's the reason, that's the thing that like triggered them. So be really mindful if you're working with teens and you tend to have that flat face, that could be really, really, really triggering for them. I'm not saying you have to like fake your whole persona, but just understand that that could be a trigger for someone who's been traumatized, or just for a teen who's like really self-conscious. That flat, that look that their parents might give them could totally set them off. Okay, some things that are different with fight and flight. When someone's in flight, they naturally distance themselves from other people because they see everyone as a threat. So you can think of like that person that's isolating. They could be in flight mode. Other emotions and things that are associated with flight: feelings of panic, dread, picking at your nails constantly, like foot tapping, because you have all this sympathetic energy that needs to be released. So tapping of the foot, anxiety, hypervigilance, just constantly looking around. These are all things that are indicative of flight. And then with fight, you have anger, rage, irritation, aggression, gritted teeth or like a tense jaw, clenched fists, and maybe even getting closer together. Because if you guys have ever watched someone who's about to fight, generally they start moving in closer, okay? So those are flight and fight. We've covered safe and social. We're gonna drop down even further down the ladder to freeze, which is the oldest response system. It's about 500 million years old. And freeze originally evolved to get us through the end of life with as least pain as possible. Because if we're about to get eaten, our body goes into freeze and we can tolerate pain really well, and we go into this numb state. So that's where it evolved from. Maybe you guys have also seen freeze happen. Has anyone seen a cat catch a mouse and the mouse is still alive? The cat catches the mouse is in the cat's mouth, and the mouse looks dead. But then the cat drops the mouse and the mouse runs away. So the mouse has been in freeze mode the whole time, and freeze mode actually saved this mouse's life, because once the cat dropped it, it was able to run away. So like fight and flight, like safe and social, all of these things evolved as survival mechanisms. We can't control them, they happen automatically. So freeze mode involves our parasympathetic, just like safe and social. We have a drop in blood pressure and heart rate. But the thing that's different from safe and social is that a human might experience disassociation. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's kind of like, almost like going through life in a dream state, like it's not real, like you're kind of like disconnected from everything. We lose access to mobilization and aggression, so we can't run, we can't fight. There's feelings of hopelessness, feelings of being really tired, feelings of being really cold, especially limbs. And I know that can be really hard when we work outside in the snow sports industry to distinguish that, because like people get cold all the time, but that's just one sign and symptom. There's feelings of shame, wanting to hide. Usually people that are in freeze will just keep looking down at the floor. And maybe they'll look up every once in a while to see if like you're safe or the situation's safe, but generally they're looking down at the floor because they want to disappear. And if someone is experiencing disassociation, it's really, really hard for them to remember the whole event. Maybe events come by stagnated or, fractured. The thing with animals, when they experience freeze, is they can shake it off. You might actually see them physically shake, and they just release that energy. Humans, it takes a lot harder to come back up the ladder. And this is important to know, because if we're in freeze or you're in fight, you need to go back up the ladder and experience all of those things to get back into safe and social. You don't just go from freeze to safe and social. You might have a student who's in freeze and then they start to get into fight mode, but then it gets too close to safe and social, and that's like not normal for them, and then they might dip back down. So that could also happen. So we are going to watch a little clip. Has anyone seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Okay, so we're going to watch a clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and there are 3 people that I want you guys to pay attention to, and I'm going to ask you guys what state they're in. These 3 people are, there's Simone Adams-Lee. She is wearing a yellow shirt. There is the teacher, and there is a kid with the last name Anderson. Okay, so those 3 people are the ones I want you guys to pay attention to, and then we'll do like a group I'll call on people just to figure out what state you guys think they're in based on the information that we see, okay? So let's pull up the clip. And once again, it's Simone Adams-Lee, the teacher, and Anderson.
Can everybody see the clip up there? Okay, before I start it. Beautiful.
Adams, here. Adam Lee,
Here.
Adamowski, Adamson,
Here.
Adler,
Here.
Anderson, Anderson, here. Bueller,
No, keep-
Bueller, Bueller, Bueller,
He's sick. My best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows this kid is going with the girl who saw Ferris pass out at 31 Flavors last night. I guess it's pretty serious.
Thank you, Simone.
No problem whatsoever.
Fry,
Okay. All right. Can you get back to the screen? Okay. Does anyone need to see that again, or was that good? Guess it's good. All right. We'll start with Simone Adams-Lee. Would anyone like to volunteer what state they think Simone is in? Lynn, I saw your hand.
Safe and social?
Yes, Simone is exhibiting symptoms of being safe and social. Any cues that you picked up on that led you to that conclusion?
She changed her facial expression a lot, talked a lot, was very expressive, moved around a lot, made eye contact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all good things. So she was using her full facial range. And Simone also used vocal prosody. She was using her whole range of voice. She was quite sing-songy. I'm sure you know people that speak like that. What about the teacher? Corey.
I'm going to say freeze, just because he just kind of seemed like an autopilot, like not really there. He wasn't expressive, wasn't. Yeah, I'm going to go with freeze.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Love it. Yeah, so I agree with you. His affect was flat. He was speaking really monotone, which would of someone in freeze.
Yeah.
And what about Anderson? Would anyone like to volunteer about Anderson? Who's the boy in the back of the class? Peter.
I think he was in fight because he sounded angry and his voice was quite loud as well.
Totally. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, his cues were he was yelling. And if you guys also remembered, he took a while to respond. The teacher was like, Anderson, Anderson. And then finally he responded. So he was indicative of fight mode, in which the inner ear muscles aren't picking up on voices, human voices. Cool. So with all of that, now we've gone into what these three states are, what they look like, how to recognize them. I want to cover why it's so important that our students and us as instructors are in safe and social mode. If we don't feel safe, problem solving is way more difficult because everything seems like a problem. When we're in danger mode or in freeze, everything's a problem. We can't catch red flags if we're not in safe and social, whether that's relating to the dating world or if that's simply relating to us as instructors interacting with our students. Like, we can't catch red flags. And so we can't catch if they're about to have a state shift. Like if we're teaching a child and we're missing those cues that they're about to dip into fight mode and start screaming and having a total meltdown, we might be missing those cues. Coming up with solutions, way more challenging, because if we feel like we're in danger mode, it might seem like there's no solution, or we might be in blame mode and denying that there's a problem altogether. Play is way harder if we're not in safe and social, because if we're down the ladder, we can't be social, so we can't play. I mean, maybe we can, but it's not going to be like as enjoyable as if we're in safe and social mode. If we're not in safe and social, we cannot tolerate a win or a loss, because it's all about competition if we're not in safe and social. I'm sure we all have experienced that with children in our class, especially if we're in a group, if there's a group lesson. The kid that like can't play well with others, they're probably in danger mode. They're probably not in safe and social. And things that are negative, if we are in safe and social, they're neutral. They're not important. But if we're in danger mode, everything, like I said, is a problem. And then feedback, this is also another thing. If we are in safe and social, we can like take feedback and apply it. But if we're not, feedback, we can start with this narrative in our head of like the blame game of like, I don't know, the examiner doesn't like me, or my student isn't like, they don't like me or something. Like that's not safe and social mode. So we really want to be in safe and social. And then lastly, I want to cover how we can help, because I've gone over what this looks like, why it's really important that we are in safe and social, but how can we help our students? One thing we can start with is asking questions and being aware. What state is our student in? And what state am I in right now when I'm teaching? How can I help? And what am I contributing? If you're totally at a loss for what to do, that's okay. We're not therapists. We are, well, maybe some of you are, but we are snowboarding instructors and we're not expected to be therapists. So if we're just not sure what to do, having empathy, which is just having this understanding that they might be going through something and maybe we've never felt it before, but just respecting where they're at. So having empathy and compassion, even if we don't know what's going on, that's okay. We can validate our students. We can normalize what they're experiencing. listening to them, super important, and not judging them. These are all ways that we can create a safe space for them. Make sure to practice what you preach in a lesson, especially with kids, and setting up that safe space. So do what you say you're going to do. You can be a safe space yourself. So you can be in safe and social. And if you're recognizing that you're not in safe and social as an instructor, like maybe you feel like you're in flight mode because you thought you were going to be late to work that morning, or you had a not so pleasant talk with your supervisor that morning. Maybe you need to regulate yourself because your student is going to neurocept if you're in safe and social or not. And they're going to start picking up on those cues and feeding off of those cues. So if you are in safe and social and they're not, they can start picking up on your safety and start regulating themselves. It's called co-regulation, and it's really important. Understand that it can be really scary to go back up the ladder. If someone's in flight, it can be really scary to go back in safe and social. Being in safe and social is not comfortable for everyone in this world. It can be really scary to have things be normal and safe, especially if you grew up in a situation in a house where things weren't safe all the time. It can be really scary. So just understand that about your student and give them space and give them time. Things that we can do with our bodies: soft eye contact. So not like staring at them, but like just gentle eye contact. Vocal prosody, making sure we don't speak in a complete monotone. And once again, you don't have to fake this, but just be aware. If you're someone that speaks in a monotone all the time, be aware that that might be triggering. See if you can work on it. If that gels with you, great. If it doesn't, okay. You can have patience and refrain from sarcasm. And that might sound shocking, but when someone's in fight or flight mode, their ear physically cannot pick up on sarcasm. I've had clients before show up for a lesson and I've made a joke and no one laughs. Maybe my joke wasn't funny, but maybe they were really nervous to be there and they weren't picking up on the humor. That's also a possibility, okay? You might hear a client say, "Why are you looking at me like I'm crazy?" That might happen because you might be mirroring their facial expression of a flat affect. They might have the wide eyes and the flat affect, and you might be doing that back to them, and they're going to be like, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Just be aware of those things. Keeping a solid routine throughout your day, especially when you have kids. Kids do really well when they have a routine. They can stay in safe and social better if you have that routine, if you're paying attention to their Maslow's needs, just picking up on all these cues that the kids are giving. Taking a break with your client also works. If you're just completely at a loss and they're having a total meltdown, take a break. Simple and can be very effective. And then here's some other little breathing techniques. If you feel comfortable doing this with your client, like if you pick up that this is like something that's safe for them to do, you can have, or like a kid or something, you can have them breathe in a color that they like and breathe out a color that they don't like. It's a really simple one. I do this with kids when I substitute teach, and it works really well because it's simple and it just gets them to be aware of their breath. You can cue them to breathe into their belly, because if someone's not in safe and social, they're chest breathing, and we want to get them breathing in their belly so that their body is giving their brain signs like, "Hey, I'm okay." Because if we're getting chased by a tiger, we're not breathing into our belly, right? We're breathing in our chest. But if the body's like, "Oh, okay, I'm breathing into my belly," the brain's like, "Okay, we're actually safe," because you can't belly breathe if things aren't safe. Other things we can do are, so connecting with humans and connecting with animals is really a great thing for breaking someone out of like fight, flight, or freeze. So if you're on the hill and you guys have access to patrol dogs, I do this with kids all the time. If I'm on Highlands and maybe a kid is like scared that day, I've had a couple clients, like kids, that were scared to do like their first black diamond, and I've taken them in to see the patrol dogs, and that like breaks them out of it. Connecting with animals is a really effective way to get someone out of that state. So if they're not connecting with you, maybe if you have the patrol dogs, connecting with them can help them feel safer and get them out of that fight, flight, or freeze. And then lastly, just understanding, if you guys are familiar with the DSM, which is like a psychology book of diagnoses, maybe we've been taught to see these students as, oh, the student just has ADHD, or they have this, or they have that. This gets us to look at the student through a different lens. Rather than diagnosing them, it's looking at them through a lens of, they're in a state, I can identify the state, because we're not there to diagnose students. We're not there to do that. We're not psychologists. We're there to help people. And just having something more with more clarity, like, oh, they're in fight mode. Okay, I recognize that, and I have some tools to help them out with that. So I like this theory because it gives us just a different lens than looking at someone like, oh, they have this condition. It's a lifelong condition. They're going to be like this forever. No, that's not the case. And yeah, just having patience and realizing that even little baby steps are huge victories. Okay. And someone might not be in safe and social the whole day, but that's okay. If you get those glimmers and you realize that they're getting there, if you start to see them drop down, you can bring them back into that moment and say, hey, remember a second ago when you had that thought or that feeling? Let's go back to that. And we can use that to anchor them back in to feeling safe. So that was all the info I wanted to share with you guys. I would love to hear if anyone has any stories of students that they can think of that they recognize what state they were in, and if you guys did something that worked, or if you did something that didn't work, or how you guys deal with getting yourself in safe and social when you're teaching. So I'm opening this up to the group. I just need shows of hands and we'll go from there.
All right, 80, I saw your hand up. Go
and then
for
80
it.
and then Mark.
And then Mark.
Yeah.
Well, mine's not about a student per se, but I have someone close to me that has been in chronic freeze mode for as long as I've known her. And all those things where she can't pay attention, she doesn't hear sarcasm, she's always cold, she's disassociated, where it's almost like she's always daydreaming in that dream mode, you know? So all these things you sharing this is really interesting. I've heard these things before, but never tied to the polyvagal nerve. And the sarcasm that you mentioned, I never heard of that, but she's never been able to pick up on sarcasm. And now it makes sense, so it's really cool to hear. And also I wanted to share that I have a friend that's a trauma therapist, and she's a somatic therapist as well, but she works with kids and that have witnessed trauma all their lives. And so her being a somatic therapist, she's shown me videos where animals go through that process, and they shake, or they move through the parasympathetic, but as humans, it's socially unacceptable. So a lot of us get stuck in those, not moving through all the way. So I found that really interesting. I thought I just wanted to share, because some of the things that animals go through is really interesting, but us as humans, we kind of control that and don't allow ourselves to go through it. So yeah.
Yeah. All right, Mark.
Hi, this is really awesome. Thank you. And I had a question. When you talk about taking a break, I just want to know if there was, since somebody's already in that state, right? They're probably already in fight if we're taking a break. How have you or anyone else found a good way to do that without pushing them further into fight? Because sometimes I find, like, especially with kids, a lot of times if they're in fight, they have like a heightened sense of justice. And now if you're taking a break or asking them to take a break so you can continue with the rest of the group, they feel attacked or singled out or something like that. I was just wondering if you had a good mechanism for, while they're in fight, to take the break without like pushing that further.
So I'm glad that you brought that up. I wasn't thinking about it in the group setting. I was thinking about it, not singling out anyone, but like if I was working one-on-one, going to take a water break, or if I was with a group, a water break, a bio break, basically. So the whole group has a chance. I don't think I would isolate someone in a group lesson, because that could be shaming to the student. If it was completely necessary for the safety of the other students, I would very gently ask that student, hey, like, would you like to just take a minute and get some water? And like kind of more give them the option and just have them, because sometimes if they're in that mode, all they need is time to go back up to safe and social. It might just be that there's way too much stimulus in the moment, and in that moment they might not be able to get out of it, but if they take a step back, that could be all they need to like snap back into it. Yeah. So great question. Yeah.
I've got something too, but it might not line up or whatever. So let me know, Dana. But if you take that break with the whole group and then just redirect that energy in another direction, like, hey, we're going to play X game or Y game or whatever to like completely change the situation that they're in. I don't know if that's going to drive them more into fight, but to me, that might redirect a little bit and help them break out of it.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, that's a big help. I think I misunderstood what you meant by break. I was thinking of a group class and being, or even a one-on-one and just being like, hey, let's take a break. Whereas, hey, let's get some water. Let's change the scene is a much better way of looking at that. So thank you.
Lynn.
Have you worked with many autistic students? How do you keep them in safe and social? I feel like they just go back to fight or flight really easily. And then you pull them back to safe and social, and then they're back and they just go back and forth.
So I've actually worked at a preschool that was all autistic children, and for every teacher there was 2 children. So I was responsible for 2 children throughout that day. And the most important thing was for me to be in safe and social. And that in itself was really challenging because I had students that would try to bite me. I would have students that would try to climb the curtains. I would have students trying to do all sorts of things. And if I could stay calm, the whole day was drastically different. So working on yourself is paramount. It's that saying, like, you can't help others until you help yourself. It's very true, especially with students that have autism. And with that being said, if they do have those small victories, celebrate them. If you have moments where they're in safe and social, that's great. Baby steps for people that are diagnosed with autism.
Does anchoring work for autistic people or no?
It depends.
It depends. Okay.
Cool.
Other questions, I can ask another.
Wait,
Tara has her hand up. Tara, do you want to talk and then I'll ask again after?
Yeah, so I actually, I run a school for kids with, it's our adaptive ski school. So we have our #1 population is kids with autism, and then followed by young adults with autism. I think a big piece, along with regulating yourself, like making sure you're ready to deal with what might happen today, really recognizing that meeting people where they are. Like, it might be okay that today you're in freeze mode and that's what we're going to deal with today. Like, that you don't try to rush the process of getting people back to safe and social, and recognizing that what might be driving them out of safe and social might be something completely and totally non-recognizable to you. And really working with trying to minimize environmental impacts is often very huge for people with autism. Things that you wouldn't even necessarily notice in your environment is possibly what is driving them out of safe and social. That has been my biggest experience. And unfortunately, mountain, particularly like any sort of ski school arena, like from check-in process all the way out to getting off the chairlift, is often not ideal situations for working with people with autism. Having said that, there's lots of just patience and open-mindedness that can move people through that. But I don't know, good questions. I'm super excited that people are thinking like that, because more and more kids are showing up in standard ski school versus programs like mine, adaptive programs. So
thanks, Tara. That was awesome. I loved how you brought up the patience thing. That's really important, and meeting people where they're at. That's crucial. And like Tara was saying, animals can get themselves out of these states really quickly. They can shake it off. Humans can take a lot longer, especially children or adults that have autism. It can take a really long time, and it might not happen. And that's really important to understand. Would anyone else like to share?
I can ask something else if you want. So if someone's having a medical emergency and they go into the freeze state, is it important to get them out, or do you want to like let them be in the freeze state for a little bit while they're having a medical emergency? Like someone breaks their wrist like bad.
Yeah, I would just treat the medical emergency as just call ski patrol and have them help them.
While you're waiting, I mean, we all know ski patrol doesn't come right away. Like,
yeah.
Do we try?
I get what you're saying. Yeah, because when you're in freeze mode, you are not feeling pain as much as if you're in safe and social. I get that. That's a great question. I would just continue to comfort the person and let them know that help's on the way and everything's going to be okay. And don't make any false promises to them, and just keep it really simple and do what you're supposed to do in that situation. Get ski patrol and keep other people from keep the scene safe, essentially. Yeah. That's interesting. Alice. Corey? Were you raising your hand?
So this isn't pertaining to a student or a teaching situation, but it again kind of, is it Addie? I want to pronounce your name right, because you brought up a friend and how 80. Okay.
Yeah.
Because you brought up a friend and how you recognize it in them, and I don't know if you guys see this fancy wallpaper. My grandparents have had this in their house for like 100 billion years. But I'm at my grandparents' house right now, and they're getting really old, which is why I'm here. And fight, because there's so many different changes happening right now. Like my grandmother can't really get up the stairs anymore, and they have a 2-story house with a basement. Like, you know, things like that. And we're trying to say like, oh, well, let's move them down to the first floor. My grandpa's like, no, absolutely not. Like, well, you know, and he gets like, you've got to fight me. And I'm like, I could carry the bed down. It's totally fine, you know? And he's like, no. He's like, why would we do that? We don't have bathrooms down here. I'm like, you got a bathroom down here. Like, just silly things. And then he starts making excuses about things, and he's just like fighting me. And then there's other times that they're just like literally frozen. And I'm like, did you hear what I said? Are you listening? Like, and I feel like freeze and fight are definitely not interchangeable, but I feel like if you almost can kind of fight so much that you get to that freeze state where you're just like, well, now I'm done fighting, and I'm just going to cut everything off. So yeah, that I enjoyed listening to this. Anyway, that's just what's going on over here.
Thanks, Corey. We'll wrap this up and so we can move on to Damion, but I just wanted to close this with saying the reason that I started researching polyvagal theory about 2 years ago is because I was living my life through these lenses of not being in safe and social a lot. Like, most of the time I was dropped down the ladder and I didn't even realize it. So finding this information was a huge relief to me, because now I knew, oh, here's what my body is going through, and it's not my fault. It was totally normal. That was what was supposed to happen when the trauma occurred. But now there's no more trauma, and I'm safe, and I can be in safe and social. And it took a long time to get there. And now I live my life mostly in safe and social, and I can catch myself when I'm not there. And I have tools like meditation, like breathing, to get myself back into safe and social. But when I first started learning about this, it was really triggering for me, and it was really hard to process this. So if hearing this was slightly triggering, that's normal and that's okay. And you might take time to process it. I just want to mention that, because when I first listened to the Polyvagal podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, this was me. Oh my gosh, this is my childhood. Oh my gosh, they're describing how I grew up. Oh my gosh. And I like had a complete meltdown, and I like cried, and I like went into freeze, and all these things happened, and it was so overwhelming. But there is this hope at the end of it. and it's really beautiful. So if this like triggered you in any way, just know that it's okay and it's normal, and there's a lot of stuff backing this up to help get you into safe and social and live there. So thank you guys so much for participating and listening, and we will move this on to who's going next. Damion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Thanks very much, Dana. Thanks for doing that. Hopefully people got some stuff out of that, and yeah, mull it over for a while. All right. Damion is up next. I don't have my little Facebook pulled up, sorry. So Damion, you can introduce your topic for us. But yeah, take it away, Damion.
Do you want to do a quick break just in case anyone needs to get up and get a drink of water and hit the bathroom? Let's take a 5-minute break, everybody, if you need to replenish. Thank you.
Dana, did you guys?
You go in robot voice.
Someone said your name does the last time.
What? What is it? I can edit it. You say you died twice. One time when you stopped breathing, and a second time, a bit later on, when someone says your name. Oh, one last time.
And I was like, I don't know, Banksy was up, like, enlighten my.
Looks like that was a much needed break for everybody. Everybody was like holding it in real bad. Everybody's like, beast, scatter.
Hello.
Hello.
Freezing, man. So, you know, my grandparents got slow internet. Surprised they know what it is.
Yeah, it's cool. You seem to have something more than dial up, so that's cool.
Did you guys do Murph today?
We talked about this before.
Frozen.
Who is this Murph dude? Gee.
I can't.
Did you do it quick?
Murph guy. I did a modification of Murph. I don't know if you can see how red my eyes are. They're like sunburnt and I'm exhausted. I'm so tired.
I got a new face mask today.
I did a terrible version of Murph today.
Oh, love it.
Isn't it
He
nice?
said
At the gym.
that
What was
it-
the version of Murph today, Mark?
The running with the weight vest was in Crocs on gravel with 300 feet of elevation gain. And the second round was 2 10-pound plates because my weight vest didn't have straps on it. And then I'm in the middle of a 100 burpee a day challenge. So I did pull-up rows, 100 burpees, and 100 squats. And so it took 61 minutes. It was just brutal.
That is brutal. I did bent over rows instead of pull-ups because I got no space for pull-ups.
Nice. Yeah, we had a few people in our group doing that.
It's also like I'm in New York right now, and it's so a sports bra, and I thought I saw a heart attack because he's like, "Where are your clothes? Corianne, where are your clothes?" I'm like, "Oh, sorry, it's just so hot."
Yeah.
All right, Damion, when you're ready, bud. Go.
All right. First off, I want to thank Conrad and Lynn for having me on this call, and just purely serendipitous, Dana's topic before is actually a fantastic lead-in to what I've got on tap here. For those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Damion Lee. I'm an examiner in Intermountain, and I've been teaching here for over 20 years, mostly at Park City area, even though the resort has changed names. I stayed there and it just moved around me a bit. Normally, I spend my Southern Hemisphere season in New Zealand. So, to be honest, not going to New Zealand, I'm a little bit at a loss, and I'm both excited for and not sure how to handle an entire summer. So that's where I'm at. What I want to talk about tonight is memory and how memory actually functions. By show of hands, who's taking notes tonight? Sweet. There's a point tonight where I'll probably ask you to either turn your notepad over or just stop taking notes. Since we're working on memory, don't worry, we'll go back and fill that stuff in. So, but right now, don't worry, you can continue to take notes. There's a couple really important things we need to hit tonight, and you need to leave this knowing. The most important parts that you need to know coming out of this is there are two kinds of memory. There is explicit memory and there is implicit memory. Explicit memory is also called declarative memory, and the important part of it is it requires concentration and focus to remember. The other kind of memory is implicit memory or procedural memory. You don't need to be conscious of how that memory works for it to work. Now, within declarative and explicit memory, there are two branches of that. One is episodic memory, and the other is semantic memory. Cool. All right, with that being said, I started snowboarding when I was about 12 years old. I had skied for years before that. And the group of friends I learned to snowboard with are the same group of friends that I skied with. And we grew up in Salt Lake. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Salt Lake, but it's a great place to grow up if you're into skiing and snowboarding. Everything's so close. You know, our parents could drop us off at the mouth of the canyon. We could take the bus up to Brighton, was our home mountain mostly growing up. So it was kind of this, as a 10-year-old going into your early teens, it was this sense of freedom, but it was a really controlled sense of freedom that your parents could allow you to, you know, roam free, but relatively contained. So, you know, as we started snowboarding about the time we were 12, we all kind of crossed over from skiing kind of one person at a time. It wasn't just a big changeover. I remember that being a really big decision I either needed to get new skis or change to a snowboard, because my friend Nate had kind of crossed over a little bit. And so I remember making that. And that was one of those first really big decisions. I mean, I didn't know at the time that it was going to be such a big decision in my life, but it was a big decision. And I remember it you know, feeling semi-important. So we learned how to snowboard. One particular day, we decided that, I don't know, today was going to be the day we learned how to do 360s. Now, mind you, not one of us had ever done a 360 before, and not one of us had any idea how to do a 360, right? It was a Graybird day. It was about a foot and a half of new snow overnight, but it wasn't your like ideal Bluebird Utah day where the next day it's blue sky. It's kind of a high Graybird day, still some snowflakes in the sky. But you know when the snow and this kind of dampens just all the sound and everything's just kind of quiet? So, and I'm going to say this was a jump in the loosest description of terms, that this was a jump. It was, I think what it was like a bigger tree that had broken off. And so it was a big tree stump with a side tree growing out of it. We'd always jumped off of it, kind of, but it was, yeah, if you're thinking back on it now, it's a terrible thing. The run-in was way too flat. It was too long. And if you guys are familiar at all with Brighton, runs are really irrelevant. Like you can go anywhere there. So this was kind of a cut through couple runs to find this jump. And I remember sitting there looking at this jump, and my friend Nate decides this is the jump we're going to do 360s on. And so he decides to go first, right? We're, like I said, 13 years old. So consequences are really low in our mind at this stage in your life. And I remember Nate goes in. His speed seemed all right. I mean, my understanding of, you know, ATML was not high at the time. When he goes to take off, though, he just kind of butters maybe like a 180, just kind of like a pivoty 180 up and over. And I remember thinking, oh, he's going to do it. And it was kind of exciting. And then, like, I hate to admit this, but there's that thing where I'm partially pretty excited for him trying, but then kind of glad that there's no way he got the 360 around. You know, it was clear from takeoff. You couldn't see the landing, but then he kind of, he pulls off. You can see that he rides off to the side, so we probably rode it out. Hard to say. He claims he did. I'm not there to judge. He pulls away. But now it's my turn to go, and I'm looking at this, and I remember being nervous, but I don't think I was nervous about getting hurt. There was that sense of, like, it was kind of that sweet spot of being nervous to try something, but also nervous to not try it. Like that internal pressure was being pushed on me a little bit. And I remember riding into it, and I don't know if I spun early or spun late, but regardless, it wasn't the right timing. And I just I was upside down and tumbled down the other side. And I was laying at the bottom, and I remember thinking, wow, that was pretty cool. I'm still alive. I felt like there's this rush that I had attempted it. Whether or not, and honestly, I don't think I had any real belief that I was going to do it taking off, that it was going to achieve it. But just the fact that I attempted it was really cool. Nate was a little bit frustrated because he might have ridden out of it, but he didn't try the 3 and he knew it. And I could see that in his face when I looked at him, that he was both gloating that he'd ridden out, but also disappointed that he hadn't attempted it. My next friend comes down, and he fell like halfway in the run-in. He didn't even make it. I don't know what happened to him. And then my last friend didn't even attempt it. He just came down. And so I remember me and Nate both feeling this sense of like, yeah, we at least tried. You know, like I said, neither one of them were accomplishments, but the attempt was the accomplishment. And I remember, you know, that was 30 years ago, and I remember that day to this moment. Now, notes. Flip your notepads over. If you've got notepads. What were the 4 things I told you to remember?
Explicit memory, implicit memory, episodic memory, and semantic memory.
So why did that stick out to you, Conrad?
Because you told me I had to remember it.
Yeah. Did anyone else remember those 4? Yeah. Anyone? So I'm pretty sure I told you those 4 things were without a doubt the most important thing that you needed to remember tonight. Why don't you remember them?
You know
why I don't remember them?
You all failed, by the way. Just yeah.
No, because that's not how our brain prioritizes memories. So I have another question. While I was telling my story, how many of you, without thought, had a story of your own come to mind? Who else had something come that you remembered? Yeah. Why? So I've got a question. Somebody who, of this group here, who has a story they want to share? Conrad, what do you got? Share.
Well, I have
snowmobile story.
No, it's very similar to yours. Yours kind of brought mine to mind. It was the first time I tried like a rodeo, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll just do a backflip or something, and then like the frontside spin went off axis. So I was like, oh, I'm doing it. I didn't land, like went like right on my face. But just the like trying it, I was like, oh, that was cool. I tried that. And I think I was like 18 at the time. So again, the consequence part of my brain wasn't very developed, but yeah, that came to mind. So
I've got a question. In my story, what triggered that? Where did you start thinking about that?
When you said that the attempt was the part that you were stoked about, not necessarily the part that like you and your friend weren't stoked about, that you didn't land it. It was the attempt of it.
Okay, cool. Anyone else have a story they'd like to share? All right, what do you got, Jamie?
I was thinking about riding at Brighton. You describing Brighton and riding there with my friends, and one of my favorite games to play, and Brighton is the best mountain to play it at, is What's on the Other Side. And so I just kind of cycled through a couple of times, going with like 80 or with Seth, or just being able to play with people. And it just, and then that description of just that right amount of snow that you're like, she'll be all right. It'll be fine.
Cool. Anybody else have something they'd want to share? Okay. Yeah, so there's some things we're going to go over through this that are, as instructors, we kind of know anecdotally exist. You know, we've observed them happening, but as neuroscience has progressed, there's things that we can actually test and see why the brain works the way it does. Memory is just simply the way we record information, how we encode it, and how we bring it back. That's all memory is. As instructors, as we get into this, we're going to see how memory works and how we are trying to engage our guest. So do I have control to share my screen, Lindsay or Lynn? Oh. All right, so first thing here, emotions and memories. And how do we manage to engage to reinforce the learning? Because what we want to do at the end of the day is whatever we've taught somebody to do, we want them to be able to retain that information and bring it back for themselves. That's the end goal, right? So as we look here, like I said, the two kinds of memory that I wanted you to remember is declarative or explicit memory and implicit or procedural memory. Declarative memory requires conscious recall, while procedural or implicit memory, you may not be aware of how it works or that it's happening at all. My story was definitely an explicit memory. It was an episodic memory. I was recalling an event in my life and then, you know, passing that on to you guys. But it was a specific event that I was accessing actively. Sometimes a triggered memory, like Conrad had, that you'll get the initial part of it, but you then have to actively think it through to move beyond that, while a procedural memory is tying your shoes. You don't actively have to think about how to tie your shoes, right? Now, the other part in declarative and explicit memory is semantic memory, and that is what it sounds like. It's semantics. It's taking unrelated concepts and you processing them to make them have a new meaning or make sense. A really good example of this is highbacks. The two words highbacks mean nothing, right? But if I say highbacks to this group, you all know what highbacks mean. There's a concept involved in them. You understand what they look like, how they perform, what they do. That's semantic memory. And that, like I said, is completely unrelated to what those two words mean. When we get into procedural memory, where we're talking about those things, fine motor skills or muscle memory, you know, we very often call procedural memory or implicit memory muscle memory, which doesn't really exist. It is actually in the brain where this happens. A lot of times those are motor skills that we start off with, excuse me, rough control, and then we slowly learn how to develop those. Like I said, the example of tying a shoe, driving to work. Very often you can drive to your place of business, and if interviewed immediately after, you could not remember a single detail of that event because the part of your brain that's functioning is your implicit memory, not your explicit memory. If you had to make a detour somewhere in there, your explicit memory would kick in and change your route because you'd have to actively be aware of what you were doing. So if you're looking at these two kinds of memory, you might notice there's an issue with teaching snowboarding and the fact that the two things are on opposite sides of the spectrum. And they're not just on opposite sides of the spectrum. Now that we can model an active brain while it's functioning, we actually see that it's different parts of the brain that are lighting up for this. For example, your explicit or declarative memory, most of that's happening prefrontal cortex, cerebral cortex, frontal lobe parts of the brain, while your procedural or implicit memory is happening in that older part of your brain. To some of the stuff Dana was talking about, your amygdala is very important for your procedural and implicit memory. So fight or flight instincts are there. So as instructors, and then based off of what, you know, Dana's presentation, what is one of the biggest obstacles as instructors with people's emotions that we're dealing with? I can only see some of you, so you can chime in.
Can you rephrase that question, Damion? I'm trying to understand.
As far as it comes to people's emotions, what is one of our biggest hurdles that we're trying to overcome with people?
Fear.
Fear. Absolutely. Fear. So fear actually interferes with both of these kinds of memories, but it interferes with them differently. So declarative or explicit memory, which is memory you need to actively engage with. So progressions, right? The step-by-step process that we've taught somebody how to make it turn. To remember how to do that, they need to access that information. Problem is, if they're afraid, their amygdala has priority over the prefrontal lobe. So the amygdala, fight, flight, freeze reactions are prioritized. All right? So we have to handle fear before we can handle that. But then when we come down to the fine motor controls, which we're actually trying to teach people through the, all of the progressions and steps that we give them, we're actually trying to get them to learn fine motor controls. So that only happens with repetition and practice. If their amygdala is kicked in, their amygdala needs to be functioning to allow them to develop fine motor control. So if they're in a fight or flight reaction, their amygdala cannot let them develop fine motor controls. So the two kinds of memory we're trying to access in snowboarding, skiing, or any kind of active behaviors, fear is impeding both kinds of memory. And this one I find really interesting. I'm gonna stop sharing here for a minute so I can see you guys' faces. So I find this one really interesting, that the way we're taught to teach people and what they need to do to learn how to have fine motor controls, those two parts of the brain do not directly speak to each other. They speak through the amygdala, which is it's the lizard part of our brain. So making sure we deal with emotions is really important. All of us as instructors will know that anecdotally, you've all taught somebody who absolutely remembers, no matter what you've done, the time they got off the chairlift and things went really bad, right? It was 10 years ago at Aspen, but they still remember that experience as if it happened yesterday. And every chairlift ride you ride with them, you look at their faces and you can see that memory triggering their emotional response, which triggers a physical response, which then you're dealing with each chair run. So negative experiences stick with people. They remember their falls, they remember their bad experiences. But because we've actually, can actually monitor an active brain, positive emotional memories are actually still more powerful than negative emotional memories. I think as instructors, we spend a lot of time trying to minimize the fear, minimize the negative. And I think that's really important. But a lot of times we don't necessarily focus, or not focus per se, as we don't fine tune our ability to speak to people's positive emotions. A lot of times we think of positivity as being positive emotion, but it's not the same as emotion. Emotion is something that people have that they cannot control. How they feel about those things are controllable. So, I'm going to share my screen again. Actually, before I share my screen, I need 3 volunteers. Give me 3 volunteers. Lynn? That's Cody. And next, is that Mark? Who's that with you, Mark?
Dave.
All right, Dave, you guys are my volunteers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you guys watch a video, and I'm going to have you guys put your sound on mute as well. And I'm going to number you guys. Lynn, you're going to be number 1. Cody, you'll be number 2, and you'll be number 3, Dan. So as I bring you back in, I'll just put my finger up and you'll come back in and answer. I'm going to show you this video, and what I want you to do is put yourself in that rider. I'm going to let you watch this rider a couple of times, and I want you to imagine you are that rider and you are doing that run. That's it. And then I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, and I just want to see how you respond to that. Does that make sense? Everyone clear? My volunteers clear? Thumbs up. Is everyone clear? Lynn, Cody? All right. I'm going to share my video again. Okay, let's see why it's not sharing. Why are you not? Why is it not sharing? Okay.
We can see your slideshow thing there, Damion.
Yeah, let me bring it back up now. All right, here we go. No, I think it's. Why is it not working? It was running so smooth when I ran it earlier. All right, that was questionable. All right, Lynn.
I'm really.
How much did that video?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. We'll bring everyone back. We'll bring everyone back. 2 and 3. Come back. It wasn't. So, looking at that video, since it's not coming through very strong, so one of the things that I find very well-intentioned, but it doesn't always translate very well, is if you could tell that rider is not very good at snowboarding, but they're enjoying snowboarding quite a bit. And one of the biggest mistakes I think a lot of people make is they ask a question like, how did that feel? How'd that run feel? Well, if I ask the question, how did that feel? What kind of answer am I looking for? Feel free to answer, guys.
You're not being specific enough. They could tell you about the weather. They could tell you about that they're hungry. They could tell you about snowboarding. They can tell you about a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm asking an emotional question. What am I trying to get from people, though?
Right, you're probably trying to get them to see what they did wrong, but if they knew that, then they would feel differently.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I ask an emotional question, if I ask a question that's close-ended and emotional, like how did that run feel? And they tell me it felt great, what piece of feedback can I give them beyond that?
Glad you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I can't give them any constructive feedback beyond that, because anything I'm going to do beyond that is going to elicit an emotional response. You can't control how people respond emotionally to what you say. So what you have to be really careful of is how you frame what you ask, because you still might elicit an emotional response that you don't want. But if you ask a question that only has an emotional response, or very likely has an emotional response that paints you into a corner, that's a mistake. So if I wanted to ask a question of that rider to get some understanding of them, what would I ask?
How did, or where do you feel like your weight was when you made that first turn next to that person that you came really close to?
Okay, ask them a question that puts them in a time and a space that's, that gives more an answer that we can then work from. Cool.
How did the snow feel when you were making turns?
There we go. So right there, that also is a question that has no, there's no judgment at all in that. That's purely them telling you. There's no right or wrong. There's no fault even possibly in that question. Cool. I like that one a lot. Yes, Jamie. Oh.
I might ask that writer how they choose or how they're able to control their speed, and if it's different between their turns.
Cool. Starting to get them to identify, because one of their own, maybe their own faults or their own strengths. One of the things I ask a lot of people is where they feel the most control, where they feel the best. What was their favorite thing about a run? I'm working in the positive realm emotionally, and I'm getting an understanding of how they perceive what just happened. If you, like I said, if you ask a closed question, you're going to be, especially that has an emotional element, you're going to get an emotional response, and that person cannot control how their emotion is set. They can change how they feel about a situation, but not the emotions they have of it. So if you ask sensation-based questions, you're more likely to get answers that give you results you can work with. Conrad asking about snow conditions, Jamie asking about when they're feeling the most in control. Parts, that way you get an answer back that is, while still has sensations and still might elicit a positive emotion, it's not an emotional question. 80, did you have something a minute ago?
I was just going to mention that you could ask, oh, how did this pressure feel? And, just bring out sensations, like pressures, like how did the pressure feel in your boot or something like that. Just an example I was going to throw out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times when we ask a feeling question, what we're actually asking or what we're thinking we want is a sensation. One of the worst things we do so often when we get somebody to change what they're doing and they're performing better, they're performing better, especially those of you who train other instructors. You get somebody performing better. On video, it looks better, but they themselves feel terrible about it because they don't have any comfort with it. Emotionally, they're not liking what's happening yet, even though if they saw the video of themselves riding, they would emotionally probably feel pretty good about the result. But at the time, that's not what's happening. So in that situation, you want to focus on result and sensations. You pass a little bit of the judgment. Don't let them judge themselves in a situation emotionally. For those of you guys who coach or work on freestyle, how often do you are like, that felt really good. I really liked that. And then you see it on video and go, oh God, no, that's not what I want that to look like. That was terrible. But you felt really good about it at the time. And if you got that reality check in the moment, it would be bad. So there is a time and a place when to decide how to use emotional feedback to your strength. That rider who was clearly terrible at technical snowboarding, but was enjoying himself, when would you want to reinforce just the emotional positivity of that run?
After success?
Yeah, what if that was the first time he'd ever made turns on his own down that run? Lean into the emotion in that case, because you want the memory, that memory could be used to build for future success. But in that case, don't tie the emotion to the run and to the success, not to the performance, if that makes sense. Don't tell them they did well, tell them they achieved. So this has to do with how you set out your goals for achievement. So when I'm thinking about setting up how to speak to somebody's emotions, there's two phases in a lesson or training or coaching where I really try and set this up. And this is in my introduction and my rider analysis phase and in my feedback, how I loop my feedback. When you're trying to get someone to, if you want to try and access somebody emotionally, snowboarding is emotionally different for different people. Conrad, you told me in your story that related to my story, it was based on the attempt and that kind of like the thrill of the attempt, whether or not it was successful or not, that little. So if I was talking to you, I would focus on that part, the attempts, the success. I'd pay a lot of attention to how you spoke about snowboarding. So this would be a lot about when I'm asking questions about people's riding. So for example, Tyson, I don't know you, Tyson, turn your mic off, or turn your mic on.
What's up?
So tell me your ideal day of snowboarding. What would it be?
Showing up to the mountain a little late after sleeping in, having a few great runs with friends, and probably ending it with a few too many drinks in the bar.
Okay. All right. So why do you like to start late?
Just get a good rest and not be in any kind of hurry to get to the mountain.
Okay. Your friends you ride with, how long have you been riding with them?
2-3 years.
Okay. Is there a time frame on the hill similar to yours? Are they kind of late casual starters?
Yeah.
Okay. Sweet. And then you finish your day with some drinks and some camaraderie?
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know Tyson. I listen to Tyson talk, and if I focus on the emotions of competition with snowboarding or the sensations of that, I don't think I'm going to get very far with Tyson. He seems to be more attached to the camaraderie of snowboarding, the little more casual start, but community vibe of snowboarding. So if I'm in a group of people, that's how I'm going to talk to him. No matter what I'm presenting, that would be my angle, would be to present towards him. So Mark over here, I'm going to ask you similar questions. What is your ideal day on the hill?
Get there an hour before the lift opens, absolutely no drinking, and go by myself. No, just,
yeah.
Fairly similar. Don't want to be in a rush. I'm old enough now that I go for a couple weeks at a time, so I don't have to be first lift, last lift every day. I'm more like a couple runs every day. Love to hit the woods, pretty leisurely pace, and just get, you know, a couple good runs in powder and woods.
Okay. So everyone who is just listening, who listened to Tyson and then just listened to Mark, what are the differences in their explanation? Because there's some similarities, but what were the differences?
There was no talk of community.
Okay, no talk of community. That was a good one. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Lynn, I didn't miss that.
Specificity about terrain.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
He mentioned the time frames of how much time he gets on snow.
Yeah. He used a very specific word that to me gave a mind frame. He used the word leisurely. So for me, I hear leisurely, and then he gives kind of a specific time frame for how he rides. But that starts to talk, even though they both maybe start a little bit late, they're not rushing through. There's a couple little key terms that come in that start to attach to their feelings of snowboarding. So those are some things that I would start to focus on to change my verbiage to match their emotional feeling on snowboarding. Is anybody here a start early, go hard? All right. So Dana, I'm going to ask you, what is if you were to give me your ideal day of a snowboard day, what would it feel like?
Ideally, it wouldn't be freezing cold. And the snow would be forgiving. And I would find some way to challenge myself that was in a realm that I could like handle, like something to do with like a stepping stone, like a good, this is like here's a cliff drop that's like 7 feet. Sweet. I hit a 6 foot one the other day. I'm going to go for the 7 foot one. So there's like a nice progression, and just with like a good crew that's like really supportive, like we're supportive of each other and like trying something new and like pushing the boundaries.
Okay. There's a lot of information in just a couple sentences there. How do we manage Dana's day? Any ideas? How would you manage her day to try and keep her so she's progressing, staying in a positive, in a state where her memory is allowing her to function and you're able to get that information delivered to her? Any ideas? Not you, Conrad.
I'm fine.
You know her too well.
Hey, how are you?
What do you got, Mark?
I would say finding appropriate challenges, finding out what her current comfort state for that day is with challenge. She mentioned specifically, hey, if I just done a 6-foot cliff drop, then today I might try a 7. So find out kind of where she is in that zone on any given day and what might be the next appropriate challenge that's enough to keep her challenged, anticipating, excited without getting too far into challenged fear, right? If you take her to a 10-foot cliff drop, it's going to be challenged fear, fight or flight, versus challenge, excited, playful, ready to attack it.
Absolutely. And she gave us a couple really important pieces also of her process that are snow conditions and group dynamic. She told us her group dynamic needs as well. So as long as you keep things positive, collaborative, I think that's something I got out of what she said, was that it's collaborative. And so to your point, Mark, if you helped find a challenge that was achievable and then you worked towards, and you can't control snow conditions, right? This isn't one of the things you can do as an instructor, but what you can control is how you present those snow conditions and how you how you frame those around what the challenge might be. So this goes into, so that puts us kind of how we set up our day. One of the big things here is how we then continue dialogue throughout the lesson, because we can set up a format for what we're going to present all day, and whether or not that creates an actual memory is different. A positive scenario, learning, we've done a rider assessment, we're delivering some information, but how do we make sure that that information is encoded and can be retrieved? And I really see this as that feedback checking for understanding phase is where this is really important. Accomplishment, and say for example, Dana's now landing a 7-foot cliff, different than the 6-foot. Yeah, she did it, but we may not be functioning in memory that she can actively retrieve. This may be more implicit. She's reacting with what she knows how to do previously. So how do I move that implicit memory into something explicit that she can pull back to later for maybe approach, or how to absorb that landing, or how to ride out? And this is where I think using feedback and question-based feedback as opposed to a deliberate directed feedback is really important. This is where we go back to that question of how did it feel when we're in the result phase? Because I want to ask about specific sensations that she can recall later. If it's a sensation that she can recall later and the movement that caused her to find that sensation, we now are starting to activate implicit and explicit memory. Sensations and reaction are purely implicit. You don't know, but if you can remember what got you in that position or what put you in that position after the fact, now we're activating both sides of our brain. So, we hit that jump, and if we or hit that rock drop, and if we decided it had more to do with our takeoff, or that was the focus point, we talk about body alignment and how activation, what part of your body is being activated as you come into that takeoff. Is it a heel side takeoff? Was it toe side takeoff? Get really specific and identify some actual joints and some actual sensations in the legs, in the upper body, in the alignment, possibly breathing. These are all things you can try and replicate later that, and to Dana's point in her presentation earlier, those are going to start activating the other parts of your brain that you don't control, or give them triggers that will help them activate. Does that make sense? So awesome job landing that new bigger cliff. You looked like comfortable, and I'm glad it was a collaborative experience we had. So I actually want you to have a couple things that you walk away with here. It doesn't matter if you know the difference between implicit and explicit memory. It's great if you do know those words. I mean, they're words. But what I want you to know is that there's half of your brain is designed to have memories that you actively recall, and the other half of your memory is designed to react to stuff it learned how to do over time. As snowboard instructors, we're actually trying to get people to just be able to snowboard, right? We're trying to get their implicit memory to work, and then when something goes wrong, they can draw on their explicit memory to help fix it. But if you had to think about every turn you made all the time, I mean, it is the curse of being a snowboard instructor, is we're stuck where we kind of do that. But you don't want to think about every single turn. You want to enjoy it. You want to be in the moment. So we want to try and get both sides of the memory working. And if we start working on how we interact with our guests and become more deliberate in when we are asking an emotional question or when we're asking a physical sensation reaction question, and know when to use them. Because there are some times when somebody has just purely succeeded and you want them to, this is their last run of the day, and you want them just to end on a high. You don't want any critical feedback. You just want them to enjoy that day. So you want to be able to bring them back to that pure emotional feeling. So being able to separate the two throughout a day, throughout a week, throughout your time coaching with somebody can be really useful. I would say work on your feedback where you're asking questions and you're getting the answers you're looking for, as opposed to telling somebody what you see from them. If you can ask good questions and they give you the answer and the understanding of what they're doing, you don't have to tell them anymore. They're probably, and if they give you the answer through feedback, you've just accessed their memory, and they're showing that they actually encoded and retrieved that information for you. Any questions?
Yeah, I got one, Damion.
Conrad. Yeah, what do you got?
It's not really a question, but I just had a thought about that last piece of feedback, and with asking questions and getting them to regurgitate the information or whatever to you. And I guess it's always a question of how far you go when you ask questions is how much you lead with the question, right? Because if you lead too much with the question that the answer is obvious, then is that really them decoding that information, or is it like, you know what I mean?
Oh, no, yeah, I totally know. Well, so there's two things. Are you trying to get the right answer from them, or are you trying to get their answer?
Right.
Now, if you're trying to get the right answer from them, this is another one. This is like, the right answer is when you take the kids into the corral at the end of the day and you ask them the question in front of them so they tell their parents the right answer. That's slightly different than when you ask a question where you're actually trying to get the answer from them. So a lot of times I'll ask people what's happening inside their boot when something happens. When you do that, what do you feel inside your boot? Now, standard answers a lot of times, well, I feel my shin against the outside cuff of my boot as I roll through. Right? That's the right answer. But every once in a while, somebody will go, well, I feel my ankle pushing against the boot here. Well, that's not the movement I'm looking for, but it's not the wrong answer either. That's the answer that they're feeling. So I take that answer and I would try and continue to follow that question to what I want them to get out of it, because that sensation they're having isn't wrong. Sensation is the sensation. It's similar to an emotion. It's not wrong, but it doesn't necessarily form the movement that's supposed to be happening. You know, they feel like a strain again with this muscle here, and I'm trying to get them to move their shin towards theirs. So when you feel that strain in your calf, let's say, when you feel that engaging, you know you're rolling your leg bone across the tongue of your boot into your shin bone. So that sensation is the thing that lets you know you're doing the thing I was telling you.
Yeah. I guess maybe you kind of answered the question already for me, or I did for myself. But when you're trying to find the right answer from someone, you're more likely to be seeking with the lead-in.
Yes.
When you're trying to ask what, you know, the feeling, the sensation was, that isn't going to be that, because like you said, there maybe is no right answer. And so, yeah.
Well, and I think that really has to do with the situation. If you're riding with a guest, is their right answer for what they're feeling to the result?
Depends.
No. If you're getting the right result, whatever they're feeling that gets them there is probably okay. If you're training an instructor who needs to know exactly what is moving and like the cause and effect relationship, then you need to dig a little bit. You need to get them to get the right answer, so that how you format that might need to change a little bit, and there might be some right or wrong. But when you're just trying to write or improve someone, I equate this a lot. To get somebody to learn how to drive, they don't need to understand how the internal combustion engine works. The steering wheel key is kind of what they need to understand. If they want to know how the internal combustion engine works, you can explain the internal combustion engine. But if they understand steering wheel and pedals, and it's getting the job done for what they want, it's what they want. So goal setting in your introduction, your rider analysis, that's how you find out how they feel and think about snowboarding. And at the end of the day, the only thing you're trying to get them to be able to do is achieve their goals in snowboarding. Yes, Jamie.
I was just thinking about how Conrad was talking about kind of the two variations of those questions. And very often I think about them as, sometimes I use that, when I use that more open-ended question, is kind of, I'm thinking of getting a test to see where they're coming from and how I can speak to them, and what their answer is can help guide me along with that. But then, yeah, at the end of the day, or at different times throughout, if I need a right answer, I might use a more leading question for that, and kind of move in between depending on the situation.
Cool. Very good. Anybody else have something? Cool. So like I said, I hope you guys just use this to put a little thought into how the questions you're asking, how you're relating to people's emotional response to snowboarding, and understanding that you don't control their emotional response to anything you do or say, but you can change how you possibly affect it by how you frame what you're asking and what you're presenting. Cool. Well, I really appreciate you guys listening to me talk. I wish that video would have worked a little bit smoother, because that guy is a fantastic rider. He's amazing.
That special blend jacket was on point.
Yeah.
That guy is having so much fun.
Yeah. It's painful for the instructor's eyes to watch, but he's enjoying himself so much. Lynn, thank you for inviting me. Conrad, thank you for hosting. Dana, that was a great lead-in.
Sweet. Well, yeah, thanks very much, Damion. We appreciate you a lot. So that was awesome. And we will all definitely remember those 4 words. just like we'll take them to the grave. Didn't even need to remember them. Like, whatever, man. Like, well, thanks anyway. That was awesome, and thanks to Dana as well for presenting. Thank you all for being here. This wouldn't be a thing if you guys weren't here, so we'd just be talking to our computers or in our minds, going over and over this stuff all the time. So thanks for being an outlet. Lynn, I know you want to speak a little bit to us moving to